Will Luffy awaken a reverse gear to rival Imu's Domi Reversi, or is the Monkey Clan secretly tied to the legendary Lunarian bloodline? I've been wondering about questions just like these for quite a while now, and apparently so have you guys. At least based on the comments. And actually there's been a ton of great questions that you guys been asking me, so I think it's time to answer some of them. Let's get into it. The first question is, instead of Gear 6, do you think that there will be a Gear Reversi or Reverse Gear in the story? And this is obviously a question that has been discussed for quite a while now, ever since we actually got to see Domi Reversi by Imu. And I feel like to answer this question, I kind of want to get into two different parts, because A is Luffy developing a countermeasure, right, to Domi Reversi, kind of having Nika hard counter it or having an own version of it, while the other side of this question goes to a little bit of an older idea, which is obviously that Luffy's gears might be based on car gears. You know how you can manually shift into different gears. Maybe if you drive automatic, you don't know what that means. But usually in a car, there is up to 5 gears, sometimes 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. And then there's obviously a reverse gear when you need to do that really cool move, parking, you know, in reverse. And sometimes you just get stuck places. There's obviously the great meme with Aston Powers. You can maybe quickly play it. Anyways, let's start with the first idea here, which is that Luffy will have additional gears altogether, and then we'll get a little bit into the, you know, Domi Reversi reverse gear idea specifically tied to Imu and what's going on Elbaph. Now, depending on when you actually got into One Piece, there was actually a time a couple years ago, right before Wano, where ideas and theories about Luffy having an additional tier, essentially a 5th gear, were actually kind of frowned upon. I remember thinking about some possibilities how a Gear 5 could look like, and some, you know, demonic transformations, or obviously Luffy's rubber fruit awakening. This was before we even knew about the Nika fruit, and it kind of was based on this idea that, well, we just had gotten Gear 4th, we had gotten Tankman and the regular, you know, like, version that Luffy uses against Doflamingo, and then of course Snake Man against Katakuri. And I think the general vibe amongst the community was that even though it would obviously be cool to see another upgrade to Luffy and another power-up, Gear 4 was such a new addition that only got revealed during Dressrosa, fairly late into this, you know, New World Saga, at least at that point, that it kind of almost felt maybe unnecessary to wait for another gear. If anything, it kind of felt a lot more like Luffy needed to polish his Gear 4th a lot more, and the focus kind of shifted towards Haki anyways in the story. Because yes, Luffy used Snake Man against Katakuri, but in the end what he really needed was train his future side and actually get advanced forms of Haki. Same with Kaido pretty much until the Gear 5 reveal happens. It's all about Ryo and advanced armament Haki and even advanced Conqueror's Haki, both of which in the end are not enough to actually take down Kaido, which is when we finally then get the entire Gear 5 reveal. So if you had asked me maybe like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, if I believe in a reverse gear, I would have probably said no. I mean, we first would need a Gear 5 and everything, and also the rubber fruit was kind of reaching its limits. There was pretty much only the awakening left. Now, however, that we have gotten Gear 5, and we know that Luffy does not in fact have the rubber fruit, but the Nika fruit, I think that this option is absolutely back on the table, honestly. If you've watched the channel for a while, you probably have seen that I've made a bunch of videos speculating about potential future power-ups for Luffy. I think there is absolutely something in terms of Haki that Luffy still needs to do, and potentially, you know, a full new gear could be taking Gear 5 and actually, you know, applying more advanced Haki to it. There's the entire thing with the Holy Knights, where we know there needs to be some sort of power that actually can, you know, override the entire regeneration and the immortality aspect. So that could also be something that could be included in this power. Then, of course, there's just the fact that Luffy doesn't even know yet about, you know, him being a god and having eaten a zone fruit. So I've always really liked the idea that potentially Luffy could kind of figure out, oh, I have a zone fruit, that means I have a hybrid form. Have we seen Luffy's hybrid form? Is Gear 5 even Luffy's awakening? I think technically we don't even know that yet. Like, we know that he has the cloud, you know, scarf around him, which we associate with awakening, but for all that we know, it could just be the regular Nika form, and there might still be an actual awakening to happen here. Again, Luffy theoretically needs a human form, which we've seen, he needs a hybrid form, he needs a full zone form, and then there is also the awakened form. Which of these is Gear 5? Because again, if it is the awakening, then there's still 2 more forms left, or maybe it's one of the 2, maybe this is just, you know, what Nika kind of looked like, then we might still have the awakening left. And also very clearly, because Luffy still thinks he has the rubber fruit, there are just entirely untapped aspects of his true power that he doesn't know about and very clearly still has a lot of room to grow into. I personally think we have barely even seen a fraction of what the Nika fruit's true power even is. I think Luffy's just kind of using it intuitively, but still kind of assuming it's the rubber fruit. I think once he gets an idea of what this fruit can actually do and has maybe someone teach him and, do some strategizing, I think we'll very quickly learn that probably the Nika fruit has some abilities we wouldn't even be able to imagine at this point. So this kind of covers the basis why I absolutely think that Luffy still has, an upgrade to go. Whether that would be a gear 6 or a reverse gear actually I think kind of matters, because I think so far the progression in Luffy's gears has been getting stronger and stronger and more flexible and creative and affecting things about himself and the environment. If there was a 6th gear, I think that would actually be different from a reverse gear, because the 6th gear would kind of be the next iteration. Like, let's say Luffy isn't fully awakened or Luffy just isn't using the Nika fruit completely full yet. A gear 6, I think, would just be the next level or the actual final level of using his fruit. While I do think that the reverse gear should kind of have metaphorically a completely different meaning, if that makes sense to you. Because just knowing Oda and by default, the fact that, going into the reverse gear means you're going backwards and doing like the opposite of what you're usually doing. To me, that should be something that if this happens in the story, that should also affect Luffy's powers. So let's brainstorm some ideas here. I mean, one thing that is a very obvious to me and something I love bringing up recently again, especially also again with the Domi Reversi stuff we see with Imu, is the idea that all the Straw Hats, and especially Luffy also, have these demon themes going on, right? Like, we have Zoro with the King of the Underworld, and you see even Death there. Enma, right? God of the Underworld. You have Ifrit and Diable Jamble with Sanji. You have the demon child Robin, who turns into a literal demon for some reason with her flower powers. Brook is just a full-on yokai, like Chopper is this monster deer, beast kind of god that looks like it's from some Scandinavian horror movie thing. So all the Straw Hats have these demon themes going on, right? And the same thing goes for Luffy, who's of course inspired by Sun Wukong, who's like this monkey demon thing that kind of is fighting with the gods. So I've always kind of liked the idea that potentially one potential power-up for Luffy, and in that case a reverse gear quite literally, could be Luffy, going the completely different direction. Gear 5 is all about pure whiteness, right? Kind of like the warrior of liberation and goodness, but we also have learned in the story recently, even with the most recent chapters, that Nika was also very much about destruction and chaos. There are these two sides to this character, even with Joy Boy, right? Where on the one hand, some people see Nika as a liberator of slaves and bringing freedom and fighting, for the good, but also a lot of destruction and chaos and craziness, which we do kind of see in Gear 5 as well. And so I would not be surprised to see a world where Gear 5 is kind of this embodiment of the good Nika, right? The liberation, the creativeness, and, defending innocent people against dark forces, while Luffy going reverse gear is the more destructive, crazy chaos side of Nika, that potentially partly destroyed the first One Piece world, as we read in the Harley text and in the mural. That could be pretty cool and something I could see, where Luffy goes, well, the good stuff isn't working, so let me just go reverse and, kind of pull out the other side of this broken god fruit. I like this particularly because it would work fairly nicely with the themes of the Straw Hats, of Luffy, but also with the Nika fruit itself and all the lore we've been getting, so it would kind of be an additional step and upgrade to Luffy's fruit, which, again, would kind of work really well with the entire reverse ideology. With the reverse concept, you know what I mean. And then for the next idea, what the reverse gear could be, I do now actually want to bring in Emu and the entire Domi Reversi thing, right? Because obviously we have seen now on multiple occasions, both on Elbaph and on God Valley, how Emu is turning very powerful people, Dory and Broggy are not exactly your stand around cannon fodder characters. They're pretty broken, powerful pirate captains who have been fighting for 100 years. They're really strong. They got turned into demons and lost their, control of their own bodies like that. Same thing happened to Rocks, who fought a little bit longer, still couldn't do anything about it, and he was kind of the strongest character we know, maybe except Emu and probably Joy Boy, but in general, from what we've like kind of seen feat-wise, is the strongest pirate, at least in One Piece history, that has actually done something in the manga. So him also having no chance to actually defend himself against this ability, Domi Reversi, is kind of crazy. And I think it would obviously make a lot of sense for Luffy to have some sort of ability to counter that. Now, I think there's two things here. One is the immortality and regeneration thing that Imu and the Gorosei and the Holy Knights have, and I do personally kind of think that that is a different type of power-up that Luffy needs, maybe connected to Haki. We'll see. It does seem to be somewhat related to Conqueror's Haki, but even Scopper Gaban, who kind of makes it slow down but can't even stop it himself, he probably hasn't it figured out completely, but I would expect it to be a more Haki-centric power. Domi Reversi specifically though, and the Abyss powers, those I can see being something that actually the Nika fruit specifically kind of hard counters. And in the scenario that Luffy develops a gear, reverse gear or gear reversi or whatever you want to call it, I think there are kind of two ways this could go. The one way could just simply be that Luffy's reverse gear is the ability to counter, the abilities that Imu has, so kind of like returning the giants back to the good side, like kind of lifting the curse, just fighting the abyss altogether. That could be something like it actually reverses the powers of darkness. That would be a very kind of creative use of the word reverse, and I would kind of like that, I think. But what I actually think could be a lot more fun in this scenario is instead of Luffy just removing the effects of the abyss and removing the effects of Domi Reversi, Luffy actually playing the game and taking pieces back for himself, as in Luffy has potentially also the power to just turn other people to his side. Maybe Luffy could, convert the giants back, but who knows, maybe Luffy could just have the power to, I don't know, go to Shamrock or go to Summers and turn them good. This, I think, would be very fun, especially with all the setup we got for Gunko. Now, I also kind of like the idea that Gunko might be turned back to good and, gets her memories back by Brook's music. We already know that the music that Brook uses touches the soul, so that could be one way. But if it's Luffy just switching people who are quote-unquote on the bad side to his side, that could be kind of nice. I think one fun aspect here is obviously the smoke, the so-called Hagoromo, the smoke clouds or scarves that people have, presumably in their awakened form, because we have seen it now in two distinct colors. We have seen it in black, like with Lucci and the Gorosei. Still not sure if they actually are Devil Fruit users or not, but they have the black scarf, right? And we have the white scarf, as we have with Luffy or Yamato, for example. I think it would be kind of cool if whatever power Imu has, the Earth God power maybe, right? Something we've been talking about on the channel, actually turns people to the dark side or is like one side of the equation, while Luffy or the Sun God powers actually, create the white scarf stuff. That could be interesting. Maybe there's even a split within Devil Fruits, or it kind of depends on the person and, their own motivations. Maybe Luffy even has the potential to awaken his fruit in a bad way. That could also be a cool reverse idea, right? Where, suddenly we have crazy destructive Nika with black hair and the black, like smoke Hagoromo scarf thing. That would go pretty hard as well. Either way, it's something that I personally really think would be nice to happen. I think there's a lot of setup for it. Again, it would be kind of weird if Oda went with the entire car gear theme and then didn't have a payoff for it. It's not guaranteed, but something I definitely see happening. So very long answer to your question there. That was a lot of fun though. The next question comes from Patreon from Eric Schaffer, and he asks, do you think that the other mythical god fruits will have powers unrelated to their name too? Kind of like how Luffy's stretching has nothing to do with the sun. I think that's a fantastic question, first of all, and thank you for supporting on Patreon. I think this question we kind of need to dissect into like a few different portions, because we first kind of got to talk about, are there even other mythical god fruits? And the second question, does Luffy actually have nothing to do with the sun? That's at least what it seems so far, but that's not even guaranteed, right? So let's start with the first part of this. Other mythical god fruits, like Eric here clearly assumes that they are out there, and I would probably agree. We've talked about it, obviously, in case, again, you need a quick reminder. In the mural and in the Harley text, but also back on Skypiea, we learn about 4 gods: the sun god, which we now know Luffy has the fruit of, an earth god, a forest god, and a rain/ocean god. Now, the most obvious piece of evidence that all of these 4 gods have devil fruits associated with them is, of course, Luffy himself, because there is a sun god in all these texts, and Luffy has the sun god Nika fruit, kind of makes you assume that the other 3 gods would have fruits as well. That being said though, I do want to point out that the sun god specifically, at least in the Japanese version of the Harley text, I don't remember exactly how it was in the English one, but in the Japanese, the sun god is the only god that's actually written with apostrophes, kind of like in quotes, in the entire text. The sea god, the forest god, and the earth god are just mentioned regularly as the actual gods, while the sun god has the weird, it's not really the sun god kind of vibe thing going on, right? Which could be that it kind of makes this specific god, Nika, a little bit more special. And maybe that could point at Luffy having the only god fruit in existence there. If I had to guess though, I think it just makes too much sense that all the 3 other gods also had, their powers passed on in this way, shape, or form. It also depends a little bit on what the god fruits actually are. Because in the Harley text, to me at least, it reads like devil fruits didn't exist in the first One Piece world. That was when the actual gods were around as actual people, presumably. And in the second world, the forest god himself is the person who sends forth the demons, which sounds a lot like devil fruits were created there. And when we kind of combine that with Vegapunk's theory that devil fruits are actually people's dreams of what they could be in the future or what they want to be, it might even be the case that, Luffy's Nika fruit, for instance, isn't 100% the sun god. It might just be how people in the second world during Joy Boy's time imagined Nika to be based on the myths and legends. So there might even be a little bit of a discrepancy here between the actual god and the powers associated with the devil fruit. This also goes a little bit into some other theories, very quick side tour about how potentially there might be multiple sun god Nika fruits, right? Like we have obviously, potentially Blackbeard talking about wanted to get his hands on the Nika fruit, presumably based on Zebek's plan, who really wanted the Nika fruit for Herald. But also, it could explain Loki talking about being the sun god. Maybe he doesn't have the fruit, but it could at least be that there are 2 fruits, one of a good Nika, one of a bad Nika, potentially, right? And that could be the case for all the other god fruits too. But let's just assume that yes, there is a sun god fruit, so there are the other 3 fruits as well, which, we've speculated obviously about on the channel. I think there's a good chance that Imu either is the earth god or has eaten the earth god fruit for a variety of reasons, right? The other idea is that potentially, either Chopper or maybe Green Bull has eaten the forest fruit. Green Bull obviously turning the entire landscape into flowers, and his fruit is very broken and very weird, I will say. He kind of becomes a plant himself. It's very strange and very powerful. But of course, Chopper's fruit is very strange as well in the way that he manipulates it, and how his human fruit doesn't actually look like a human in his awakened form or even in any of the other, poses that he hits. So that could be kind of cool, where it's an actual, forest creature god kind of thing. As for the ocean god, that could be, again, maybe Emu, maybe it's another fruit handed down, connected to Davy Jones. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe the darkness fruit is the sea god fruit. Maybe there's a moon god as well, right? That's something that's been speculated a lot. Moon versus sun, the moon is so important. Though I will say in that regard that Luffy's devil fruit is so much more associated with the moon. We see Gear 5 for the first time in front of the moon. The entire white hair, flowing white hair, red eyes things that Luffy has going on in Gear 5 is exactly what for example, the Minks have. And they awaken it in front of the moon. Really weird. Maybe that plays into the entire, sun god thing, but it's not the real sun god. Maybe Luffy has the moon god fruit and someone else has the sun god fruit. So, sorry, it's so easy to get lost in this. I'm having so much fun talking about the gods. It's been something I've been thinking about a lot recently. But yeah, I do think that there are these other god fruits out there. Part 2 then is obviously the main question. Do you think that, these will have powers that are actually not related to their element, because Luffy doesn't really use the power of the sun or light? Now that would basically mean that even though the earth god is the earth god, he can't just create the red line, or the earth god, the water god can't just flood the seas, and the forest god can't actually grow trees and forests and stuff like that and plants. And I think it's a fair question to ask, because Luffy so far hasn't exactly done sun related stuff a lot. It's a lot more of his former rubber powers. We have seen some crazy stuff of him just playing with the elements, grabbing lightning bolts. He has been creating stuff from his imagination, apparently just pulling stuff like the glasses and the baseball bat out of thin air, creating matter. And of course, just being very goofy and also affecting the environment around him by making everything very bouncy and malleable in a lot of ways. That being said, Luffy, of course, has been showing, fire-related powers in the past. Red Hawk after the time skip was the first one, and we got Red Rock. There is something weird going on, I think, in general with the monkey family and, fire. Something we'll actually get into in the next question more, so I want to save this. But theoretically, there have been fire-related powers that Luffy has been using, right? Also, I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier, that Luffy doesn't know yet he doesn't have the rubber fruit. In Luffy's head, he's just doing rubber stuff, and in Gear 5, he's just kind of high and maybe a little bit possessed even by Joy Boy's spirit or Nika's spirit in that fruit, right? When you, Zoro, when you really align with the fruit, right? So he gets a little bit less Luffy-like. And so maybe he's just on this like semi-aware high where he just gets like super creative and doesn't actually think too much about what the power actually is and how it has nothing to do with rubberiness. So it could absolutely be that these fruits are named after certain gods but have like different powers. It could be, for example, that the gods have more something to do with agriculture and terraforming. Something I speculated about, that maybe each of the gods has a ancient weapon connected to them, that actually helped terraform the One Piece world and made it livable. After all, we do know that the Sky People came from the moon after they ran out of resources to then come to the Blue Planet to live there. That could be something, and maybe they have completely different powers instead. But I could also very much see it being the case that something like the Red Line was created by a very powerful Earth God. It could be the real Earth God, or it could have been someone who uses the Earth God fruit. Same for the Grand Line, which is the exact opposite to the Red Line, right? And that could have been created by an ocean god. As for the Forest God, we have candidates for that stuff too. We have the Adam Tree, the Eve Tree, the Tree of Knowledge on Ohara. There's a lot of stuff that could theoretically be created by a godlike figure, but I almost tend to associate those more with the original actual gods and not so much with the devil fruits. Do with this what you will. I'm very curious if you guys have other thoughts about this, but I would almost rated like 60-40 that they do have different powers, I think. But it's very hard to guess at this point. I think once we get one of the other god fruits, hopefully, we'll have a much clearer picture of what that actually looks like. Next question from YouTube. Does the monkey family have ties to the Lunarians? And this is what I mentioned earlier when we talked about the monkey family being a little bit weird and having stuff happening with fire. This is a great question, and something I actually made a video about, I think like roughly 2 years ago. Was it 1 year ago? It might have been 1 year ago, actually, because it was around New Year's. In a chapter review where I speculated that Luffy might have Lunarian DNA. Now, at that point, I kind of thought that, oh, we don't know who Luffy's mom is, and there's like some weird things with Luffy and fire already. Could it be that Luffy's mother was a Lunarian, or like that at least has like Lunarian blood? With recent chapters, and especially the God Valley flashback though, I kind of wonder if it might actually just be the monkey family that has Lunarian connections. And let me quickly explain what I think this comment was basing this on, and why I think it's actually a fairly relevant and very interesting question. And again, I think the main thing that points to anything even being there for this quite out there seeming theory or idea is the very weird way that Luffy does use fire. I think with the reveal that, Luffy has Gear 5th and is actually the Nika fruit user, not the rubber fruit user, I think people have just kind of quietly accepted that, oh, maybe, Luffy was tapping into some weird Nika shenanigans even before he had his awakening, but technically that should not be the case. I mean, we've not seen Luffy do anything else that kind of defies his own devil fruit or powers or physics in the One Piece world in general. If anything, it should have been after he awakened Gear 5 that he's now maybe able to use more sun or fire related powers, but not really before. So seeing Luffy actually ignite his own fist with Red Hawk for the first time on Fishman Island is a very strange moment that obviously back then already got speculated about a lot. It's like, okay, he has a rubber fruit, is he like using friction, but how does that work? It's not been explained to this very day. And so the other option to it, not being related to Luffy's devil fruit in any way would then be that, well, maybe it's something Luffy can just do naturally as part of his physical body, because it turns out, as we learned during Wano, there are actually a race of people in One Piece, even though they have been mostly extinct, yes, that actually are directly tied to fire, which are the Lunarians, as we see with King, the top right-hand man of Kaido. Now, as we see with King, he has his little flame on his back that as long as that flame is on, he is practically invulnerable, but he also can manipulate fire itself. Basically, the only time you can actually do anything to King is once he kind of sacrifices his invulnerability for greater speed and greater strength, kind of a trade-off. Kind of makes you wonder why he would ever do that, but I feel like that's another discussion. Maybe you can keep it up indefinitely. Definitely though, the Lunarians, for a very clear reason, one of the strongest, if not the single strongest race in all of One Piece. And it kind of comes with this whole other, like side bucket of mystery surrounding them in general. King is the only known living survivor of that race, even though we don't really know what happened to him after Wano. We also hear from Marco that he heard from Whitebeard that the Lunarians used to live on top of the Red Line and were once considered the gods of the One Piece world, which of course now, after Egghead Island and especially after Elbaph, hits very differently, where we get to learn about the first age of One Piece, and everything. And we also know that the Lunarians obviously winged people, part of the winged races, even though they have black wings. And while we don't know if they came down with the other winged races from the moon, the fact that they're called Lunarians, which is the Latin word for moon, Luna, will kind of suggest that very strongly. I personally have been a very big fan of the idea that potentially the Lunarians come from the moon, were actually the ones who founded the city Burka that Enel discovers in the cover story, and that they might have even potentially been the original gods of the One Piece world, only that they weren't actual gods, but just very powerful beings of an advanced technological space civilization that then came down from the moon to colonize the One Piece world and kind of became its gods. That would, of course, very interestingly then tie Luffy into the entire Lunarian thing, especially again, as we talked about earlier, funnily enough, that Luffy's Gear 5 powers are a lot closer to the moon in a lot of ways, the Gear 5 thing. So there are some interesting connections already between Luffy and the Lunarians. The biggest thing though obviously being that Luffy doesn't have wings, neither has Dragon, neither has Garp last I checked. And again, that is kind of how I came to the conclusion, hey, maybe on his mom's side Luffy has some Lunarian DNA. Who knows, that could be actually something that's true, though. Again, would he have wings then? Probably, but not necessarily. And what kind of made this entire theory even a little bit more complex and confusing is that very recently, during the climax of God Valley, we saw both Garp and Roger obviously team up against Rocks, who got Domi reversied by Imu, and we see them use their ultimate moves at that time, going all in, pouring all their haki into one attack, which by the way also something new that we didn't know you could do. And what does Garp do? He uses what's basically a Luffy Gatling gun with flames coming out of his fists, which the panel is, first of all, very cool. Awesome panel, great attack. Classic question, as everything with One Piece, is this art? Is this Oda being stylistic here? Is it like hockey flames? But it looks like Garp is just creating fire here. Like, is it just me that is a little bit baffled by this, especially with the Luffy using fire stuff connection as well? And I think this one panel really made me wonder if there's a little bit more to the monkey family overall than we kind of all thought. Especially since in that entire same flashback of God Valley, we learn about Rocks being connected to the Davy clan, potentially the Buccaneers, and that obviously both Roxy Zebek and Blackbeard, his son, have something special about their body, something we keep hearing about too. Which makes you wonder if there's something very special about the Davy D clan. Maybe there is something other special about the Monkey D family as well, especially if one is kind of tying back to Davy Jones and the other might be tying back to someone else, either from the Void Century connected to Joy Boy or maybe even further back in the past. There's of course the entire mention of the people of the half moon in the mural as well and in the Harley text, so the D clan being tied to that could be a possibility. Maybe all the different D family members have some sort of special ability. That could be something that actually is the case. Now, you could make the very fair argument that Dragon hasn't shown any fire-related abilities, though I will say Dragon hasn't shown us anything in general yet power-wise, so it's kind of hard to assess. If Dragon ever starts, pulling out fire fists though, I would absolutely call it in favor of this idea. But Dragon also, has been speculated to be the man marked by flames with his tattoo and stuff, which doesn't necessarily have to play into this idea, but it's still kind of weird in general. Like, I kind of like the idea that maybe the Monkey family, or at the very least Luffy, has some ties to the Lunarians. Again, we very clearly are going to learn a lot more about them. They very clearly were very prominent and one of the big parts of the One Piece history, the Ancient One. So I think once we learn more about that, there is a good chance that Luffy and the Monkey family are connected to them, but it's not guaranteed. And again, I think the biggest factor of, it not being the case would probably be none of them having wings. Not Garp, not Dragon, not Luffy. And that would be the easiest symbol that they are related. We'll have to find out. Next question, again from Patreon, from Claybird99. Do you think that Vivi will join the Straw Hats, perhaps in Elbaph, along with Yamato, since Yamato's cover story has wrapped up now as well? So here we're talking a little bit about new Straw Hats, new old Straw Hats particularly. And I think they're also the two most interesting ones in the sense that both Vivi and Yamato kind of have already been invited by Luffy into the crew, and they both kinda said yes, right? Like, Vivi is pretty much an honorary Straw Hat, but then decided to not travel with the crew because she wanted to take care of her kingdom. Meanwhile, Yamato, of course, stayed behind suddenly as like a weird little plot twist at the end of Wano to protect the country, even though Momo is there and the Scabbards are there to kind of, take care of this, and Momo has now basically dragon's fruit. It's a bit of a sensitive topic for me because obviously Yamato not joining the crew was the single biggest letdown for me after Wano in general. A character that I know Yamato is a very polarizing character in different ways, but for me, she was just a fantastic addition to the story, and I was genuinely so excited to see her as part of the Straw Hats. The chapter that we first got to meet Yamato with the mask on still, I was already like, I would love for them to join the crew. And then throughout the entire Onigashima raid, we kept getting little hints that, hey, do you want to join my crew? Do you want to take me out? Like, I've been captured and shackled to this island my entire life. Luffy, please take me out to sea so I can become like Odin. And then she just stays in Wano. What the... So, as you can see, I still haven't quite gotten over that, but I do really hope that both of these characters would come and join the story. I think Vivi already had such fantastic chemistry with the group back during the Alabasta saga. I think the biggest issue with Vivi was that she was very clearly fairly behind in power to most other Straw Hats, but she would have probably grown with the rest of the crew had she actually joined. And I don't quite know if the reason that she didn't join back then was because Oda only wanted to have one Straw Hat, and that was the surprise addition of Robin, or if he kind of already knew that no, Vivi needed to go a different route and, make like some different experiences, mainly the entire arc during the Reverie, before she could reunite with the crew and be helpful in that sense. Because obviously Vivi has now experienced her own dad dying, has seen Imu, all these things, is now on the run from the government with Walpole and Big News Morgan. And we already know that, Imu themselves has this very weird obsession with Lily and now Vivi, who look very much alike. And they're actually D-Clan members, but they probably had some connection too with Imu, and they were actually part of the 20 original king. There's a lot of history there that Vivi is very relevant about, right? And I think that Vivi is going to play a massive role in general for the end of the story. So I do expect her to come back. Elbaph might be a little bit too early. The earliest I personally could see is maybe when the Elbaph arc actually wraps up. That's something I could see. During the Elbaph arc, it would kind of not make too much sense because I don't think that Vivi or Walpole or Morgans even could provide any value right now as Imu's on the island, but I might be wrong. Yamato, on the other hand, well, as the question already suggests here, their entire cover story, which I was very confused about for a long time, and I think I was not the only one, finally wrapped up. The big payoff of that entire cover story very clearly was two things. One, that Yamato gathered a small group of people around them consisting of a variety, former good guys, former bad guys like Ulti, right? And the second thing, of course, the massive reveal that Gecko Moria was actually part of the Kozuki family and was known as a hero who people thought died on Wano fighting Kaido. Tying in so many crazy things about the Wano arc, but especially Thriller Bark, suddenly tying Kozuki Moria to, the Gallela, who probably were connected to Wano and all these things, making you wonder, Does, Moria have the ability to read the poneglyphs? If so, him joining Cross Guild could be the way that they get access to finally deciphering, the poneglyphs and stuff like that. Long story short, the entire cover story is over now, and I would really, really like it. And Oda's, I feel like, has been kind of hinting at the fact that Yamato is now on the way to Elbaph, or at least on the way to catch up with Luffy and the Straw Hats. He's been kind of saying something along those lines too in one of the question corners, and me just being extremely biased for wanting Yamato on the crew, I really hope that this will happen. I also don't know why my voice suddenly got weird. Apologies for that. Hope I'm not gonna get sick. Oof. Next question from YouTube. Who are your top 5 characters right now? Which is one of those questions I always dread when people ask me that in person as well, because it's so hard to choose, and it really depends on the metric. So I think what I'm gonna do here, I wrote down my 5, I think, favorite characters, though it's really hard because even favorite characters, there are so many I love so much, it's really hard to narrow it down, but I'll do my 5 right now that are my favorites. And then I'll also wrote down who I think are the 5 strongest characters right now, which I'm not a power scaler. These are personal opinions, and I'm willing to put them out there. I know I'm going to get blasted for these in the comments, but I'm going to do it anyways, because I'm not sure what the question was actually hoping for. So, for my 5 favorite characters right now, my favorite character in One Piece for quite a while now, it used to be Zoro. It has been for quite a while now been Rayleigh. And this is partly just because me as a One Piece YouTuber, I want to have a bit of an edgy take, of course. Going Luffy or Zoro or something is just too easy, right? I think Rayleigh is a really fun character. He's a cool guy. He's one of Luffy's mentors, kind of really fits into that mentor figure as well as no one else in the story. I really like his kindness, but also he has the power to back things up. Everyone respects him. He was very close to Roger in terms of power. We now know that he scored Shaki, the most sought after woman in the entire world, and he did it in a very charming and romantic way. I love, their relationship. He has a bit of a gambling problem and stuff, which is kind of funny. And I don't know, it's kind of nice knowing that there's this person who already knows the entire history. He went to Laugh Tale, is not telling us about it, but is clearly there to support and guide Luffy. And whenever Rayleigh shows up, come on, he always does cool stuff wherever he goes, whether it's flying in to stop Kizaru and protecting the crew, whether it's, swimming across the entire calm belt to Amazon Lily through the entire Sea Kings, or just rolling up and defending Amazon Lily against Blackbeard and the Marines, even though he knows that he's probably weaker than Blackbeard. Just aura alone, he gets the respect from Blackbeard, who kind of retreats then seeing him, even though Rayleigh's like, yeah, probably not strong enough at this point anymore, but good that it worked kind of vibe, right? So I love the guy. I hope we're gonna get a lot more from him in the story. It would be very cool to see some of the former Roger pirates drop in, and helping Luffy towards the end of the story. Gaban obviously strongly rising in my own ranks as well. We'll see what he does. Gaban, by the way, I would put maybe on 6 or 7. He's my man right now, but he has to work a little bit harder to get into my top 5. Then in no particular order, in 2 and 3, I have Sanji and Zoro. Yes, I'm trying to avoid the beef. Zoro just used to be my favorite character. I still love seeing Zoro in the story. I think in recent years, just because his arc has just mostly been being cool and becoming stronger, I still dig that. I love every single Zoro scene we get. He has great humor in the manga, I think. Something that sometimes gets lost a little bit in the anime. And yeah, just a great guy who is just fun to watch fight and cut people up and get stronger. Sanji has kind of been maybe the character who had the biggest rise in my books after Whole Cake Island specifically, because Sanji's character arc that he's gotten in the New World, I think, is not even close to any of the other Straw Hats ever since Marineford. I think Oda finally taking Sanji a lot more serious as a character. Well, not that he didn't take him seriously, but you know what I mean, kind of adding this entire new layer to his backstory and actually addressing, his over-the-top chivalry and his horniness and all these things. I know people who still don't love these traits. I think they are very much there on purpose, making Sanji a flawed character. And I just loved seeing Sanji's, quest from being like, oh no, I need to be the one who protects everyone and protects the girls and protects the crew, to finally him having to accept Luffy is there for us and I can actually trust him. And also then having like that arc continue where in Wano he actually allows Robin, a woman, to save him, compensating for his, self-nerf by not wanting to fight women, and also trusting Robin to save him. And then the entire thing of, turning on his Windsmoke genes and losing his humanity and turning to Zoro and being like, hey, if I ever go rogue, put me down. Like, I don't want to hurt anyone. Like, there's so much cool stuff going on with Sanji. He's always been a very cool character. And while Zoro really, for me, satisfies and tickles the entire like power scaling fighting stuff of One Piece, Sanji is one of my all-time favorite characters in terms of character development. Then on number 4 on my list, I have Dragon. Again, a little bit of an edgy take, I will admit. This is also more recently because I think Dragon has gotten such a crazy cool amount of characterization on the God Valley flashback that I am beyond hyped now to actually see stuff and see his story finally unfold in the actual manga. This is very much my own agenda, but I am so convinced that Dragon will end up being the second most important character in the entire story next to Luffy. Yes, Luffy's the main character. Luffy will be the one who changes the world. I think that his father needs to be there and will do that with him. And I do think that the fact that, people complain about Dragon not having done anything in the story and we don't know his powers yet, and he hasn't done anything except look around and look, stern towards the east. I think it is very much clear at this point that Oda has been withholding a lot of information about Dragon on purpose because everything surrounding Dragon, his powers, anything he does, I think it's so relevant to the endgame of the story and the truth of the One Piece world and whatever there is to do for Luffy and co. That's the reason he can't reveal anything. Kind of how Wano suffered a little bit also from Oda not wanting to reveal too much about rocks yet, which then kind of led to us not knowing that much about Kaido's backstory until now as well. So yeah, Dragon, really high expectations in my book. I'm just fascinated by the character. I think he kind of went in my head from being this bad anime father, abandoning his kid for a greater cause kind of, to very clearly being now set up to be the only sane person on God Valley who was like, we're hunting innocent people. What the, like, are you guys okay with this? And he's the only one questioning it, doing something about it, and immediately being like, nah, this is so messed up, I gotta change, like, the entire system. Something that Garp didn't do his dad. So just seeing how passionate and willing he was to actually sacrifice his own life to save Shamrock and Shanks and then save as many civilians as possible, very much knowing that he's gonna have to pay the cost for it, immediately punching one of the Celestial Dragons as a Marine. Love it. This might be a little bit of a temporary hype potentially, but I'm like so excited about Dragon. And then number 5 on my personal favorite list is Usopp. I don't think I need to go into too much detail with that. Usopp is just one of Oda's best characters by a mile. It's so fun seeing him develop throughout the entire story, and I think every good One Piece fan starts off not liking Usopp and ending up having him as one of their favorite, if not even just straight up their favorite Straw Hat. Again, I don't think I need to explain to you why that's the case, and I'm sure there's gonna be a lot. If Usopp's your favorite character, let me know in the comments, throw out some love there. All right, with that, let's now get to the more dangerous part of this question, the more dangerous interpretation, which would be my 5 strongest characters, the top 5 characters in terms of strength in the story. And I gotta say, again, I'm not a big power scaler. I have my own thoughts. I'm gonna share them here, and you are free to disagree with them. Of course, I think mine are absolutely right. No, I'm just kidding. Let me get into it. I think the strongest character in One Piece right now, at the very least, seems to be Imu. We do know that they apparently defeated Joy Boy, even though we don't know what exactly happened there, and maybe Joy Boy was stronger. We don't know. Imu came out on top. They seem absolutely insanely broken. Joy Boy's haki is the only thing that gets them riled up at the very least. So yeah, I think putting Imu on top for now at least is gonna be a simple choice. That's gonna change potentially, obviously, through Luffy, and it might also have been true for some other characters who are stronger than Imu, but that's my top 1. And again, so in second place, I'm just gonna put people like Joy Boy, Nika, some of the other gods, right? Maybe Davy Jones. I think that these ancient legends, who lived in the legendary past of One Piece, I do think that they were on a completely different level, potentially, creating devil fruits, having crazy power to, terraform the entire world and create all these crazy things that now exist in the One Piece world. I would put them all in this basket, though I'm not sure if that really counts. So going back to the, more current storyline, I think second place would at the moment just be Rox D. Zebek or Davy D. Zebek. Oda, for some reason, has refused to really show us his power. I still think he has a devil fruit power that Oda really doesn't want to show us, even in Rox's own flashback. Very curious what that's going to be. But I think he made it very clear that this guy is stronger than even Garp and Roger and the Holy Knights at this point in the story. He pretty much wipes the floor with everyone until he kind of gets Domi reversed by Imu, because nothing hurts Imu, putting him at number 2. Number 3, for some reasons that I already mentioned above, I think Dragon's gonna be very important. He's my number 3 on this list. I think Dragon is the 3rd most powerful character in the story. This might turn out to be an incredibly bad take, or it might turn out to age like fine wine. We will find out, but in my head, that's where he's at. Number 4, I'm gonna put 2 people, but you will see why. I have the twins, the power twins, Shanks and Shamrock. I think at this precise point in the story, Shanks at the very least is one of the strongest characters, one of the 3 most powerful characters alive, despite all his death flags. But Oda has very clearly built up his twin to a similar degree. He's actually, in a recent editor comment, made it very clear that Shamrock is crazy important, and he even needed to explain what the One Piece is to his editor in order to justify why Shamrock was being introduced to begin with. So we know that Shamrock is gonna be very close to Shanks, maybe has his own stuff going on. Again, we haven't seen Shamrock do super crazy much except his sword entry. I think he's gonna be at least close to Shanks in power, and since they're twins, I feel like that seems like something that could happen. Gonna put them on the same tier. And number 5, no big surprise there, is Blackbeard. He might be even higher up on this list. We don't really know yet. He's very powerful. We do know he's probably gonna clash with Luffy, with Imu, with Shanks. He's just out there to, challenge all the strongest people in the story, and for a good reason. I think he has the power to back that up. And I also think that Blackbeard is gonna climb this ladder even further as the story continues, probably at some point making it into the top 3 or top 2, or maybe even the top of this list. And yeah, it's really top 5 is hard, as you can tell. There's a lot of names that didn't make it on this list, like Mihawk, like Akainu, and that's not necessarily because I think they're necessarily a lot weaker than all these characters that I mentioned. It's just really, it's hard to scale. I don't love doing it, especially for characters that we haven't seen, a lot of what they can actually do for in the story quite yet. So instead of spending more time on this very controversial list, let's move it away and now go to the next question from Patreon, from Kathy, who asks, do you think that Zeus will tell the Straw Hats about God Valley? That's a fantastic question, I gotta say, Kathy, because obviously the logical, question to come away from God Valley is, technically, there is a Straw Hat accessory or Straw Hat adjacent character on the island, which is Zeus. He existed as a homie and was part of the battle. He is conscious. He knows what happens on God Valley. He's seen everything that Big Mom has basically seen. Could it be that Zeus actually shares a lot of the information about God Valley with the Straw Hats? I think it's really hard to answer that one. It also depends a little bit how the entire God Valley flashback actually was playing out in the story. Was Loki or maybe even Scopper Gaban telling the Straw Hats about what happened on God Valley? Or was this just Oda showing us a little bit more? And, the characters, Luffy and Zoro and Sanji, they only learn about the Herald and Loki part. I think it kind of depends on that. I do kind of like the idea, though, that at some point Zeus might reveal something about Rocks or God Valley or even something else that Big Mom was aware of to the Straw Hats. That would make a lot of sense and would be a nice additional reason why Nami picked him up, during Wano. Also, I very quickly want to point out that I went into a bunch of these questions and some other questions also on my podcast, Drink Sake, where I had Roger Space on, who was visiting me here in Tokyo in Japan. So if you haven't checked out the podcast, I did one with Connor and Garn and Joey and a lot of my other friends here in Japan. It's really cool. If you like anime and One Piece and Japan, go check it out. I'll leave the link in the description below. Anyways, next question is from Brandon Fitzgerald, also on Patreon. How advanced do you think the ancient kingdom really was? Which is a great question, because anything regarding the ancient world of One Piece and like One Piece old-time lore is my absolute favorite stuff, has been for a while now, when Eckhead Island and Elbaph have just opened that door and given us so much more insight into, you know, the history and true past of One Piece, that it's been like so insanely fun for me to just speculate about that stuff. And I think the answer to this question kind of comes down to what the Ancient Kingdom actually was. I mean, first of all, one thing I always love pointing out is that Ancient Kingdom is actually a wrong translation that I think the English community has just kind of accepted, because technically it is in Japanese the Kyodai Okoku, the Great Kingdom, so it might not even be that ancient. And obviously there's, you know, always been this kind of sense that it's probably the place that Joy Boy was related to. But honestly, for all that we know, the Ancient Kingdom, the Great Kingdom, might have already been around in the first One Piece world as well. And in my personal headcanon, when looking at the mural and reading everything, it does seem to me like the One Piece world kind of got less and less technologically advanced as time went on. I think that the first world, which shows us like space shenanigans, and again, the moon, we see probably, you know, the moon people colonizing the blue planet. Since we have space travel and stuff there, I do think that this was the most technologically advanced time period in One Piece. I think the second One Piece world still had a lot of really advanced technology. Clearly, the ancient weapons were being used. We know that some of Elbaph's tech goes back to that. But I do think that the first world was a lot more technologically advanced. And it really just kind of depends if the Ancient Kingdom was only first world or second world or both, and kind of made a transition as well. Either way, I do kind of imagine the first One Piece world very adjacent to actually maybe even our current, you know, level of technology and a little bit beyond. Again, we have space technology. We know very clearly that Vegapunk based pretty much all of his inventions on research he got, or he did, you know, about the Ancient Kingdom from the Library of Ohara. And what do we see on his island? We see climate control, we see fridges, we see lightsabers, holograms. So to me, it very much sounds like at some point in the story, and again, this might have very well be the Ancient Kingdom, there was actually the sci-fi level of technological advancement, right? And technically, that makes One Piece a sci-fi story. We're in like this post-apocalyptic world that now has like been regressed to maybe like what it would be like early 17th, 18th century technology that's now catching up slowly again, right, to all this stuff. But technically, the One Piece world used to be a sci-fi world, and I think that's very cool. I like mixing genres, you know, it kind of puts One Piece in this very unique place of fantasy and sci-fi and mixing all these different genres, which is kind of cool. But in the end, we'll have to see where the Ancient Kingdom actually was. I just really want to see a flashback about the first world of One Piece, because I think that the first world was very distinct from the second, even though elements are obviously going to be important from both of them. But I don't know, I just personally can't wait to see all the crazy tech. And I wouldn't be too surprised, again, seeing all the pollution and like industry that we see and the people mining the planet for whatever it is, probably the Forbidden Sun in the mural. I don't know, like I would love to see what that actually looked like and what Oda really imagines the One Piece world to have looked like in the past. Next question comes from YouTube again. What is One Piece's biggest flaw in your opinion? That's a great question. I feel like there's not too many. There's a reason this ended up becoming somewhat of a job for me, because I think it is one of the greatest stories ever written. I think it is somewhat of our modern Odyssey, and I do think that, you know, if humanity makes it that far, 100 or 200 years from now, people will be reading One Piece in school. I think that's absolutely unironically something I could see happen. If I had to be like super nitpicky, I think my biggest opinion that would be like more negative would be that I think the anime, despite having picked up enormously in terms of quality, I'm not a big fan of the power scaling in the anime, just because I feel everything feels so over the top at this point that the anime power scaling, it has kind of become detached from the manga, and nothing feels special anymore since everyone who's fighting now destroys the entire, you know, surroundings. I feel like it kind of has thrown a little bit into whack for me personally. That would be a personal gripe. I know, you know, the anime fights are for many other people their favorite thing about One Piece, and I think that's fair. So for me personally, that would be probably my biggest flaw, if I had to pick one. And maybe the fact that One Piece doesn't actually use the filler material like cover stories, etc., to actually turn into movies or filler episodes and stuff like that. I think that's a great flaw. Storytelling wise, I don't know, there's not much to really complain about. Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I could like have like minor story beats that I could probably nitpick about, but that's really kind of mostly it. Next question from Hypebeast on YouTube. Do you think Usopp should die to have another emotional One Piece death? Yes, I actually made an entire video about it. If you hear my precise thoughts about it, you can check that one out as well. But yeah, long story short, I think Usopp's entire dream kind of revolves around himself sacrificing, himself for someone else, for the rest of the crew, for Luffy maybe. And is there a more heroic thing, to become a brave warrior of the sea than sacrificing yourself in an epic moment for your friends? I don't think so. I think it would make One Piece, it would be one of the most heartbreaking deaths. I think a lot of people would hate it. I'm not sure if Toei or Shueisha or the editors would allow Oda to do it for merch reasons. Would it make the story incredibly good and raise the stakes for the entire endgame of the story? 1000%. So even though it would be a terrible moment, story-wise and character-wise, and again, I love Usopp so much, it would make sense, I think. That would be my controversial answer here. All right, and then we have from YouTube, from Rosando Felix. When you create content for One Piece and you and your team are searching for information to present on topics such as finding out lore from many different countries, are you looking at Oda's conversations as starting points? An example of this would be Oda stating that Luffy would be Brazilian. Do you and your team use the Brazilian folklore as a starting point to begin your research and ideas? Which is a fun question. I always enjoy talking a little bit about my work process too. In case you don't know, there is a few people at this point over the years who have joined me on the journey that is this channel. I have people helping me with research and ideation and editing, and we have a great artist who makes the fantastic thumbnails. I've seen people who actually speculate if the thumbnails are AI. No, our guy is actually insanely good. Shout out to Link. He does beautiful stuff. And yeah, it really depends a little bit on the video, I think, because I very much enjoy theorizing about One Piece and kind of can't help myself doing it. I very often stumble into things just from a research chain. So there is something I'm interested in. I can give you an example maybe from a video I made recently about the Straw Hat, and basically the idea of the video, again, you can check it out later, but the idea is that the Straw Hat is more than just an artifact, but that it's actually important, has some secret power, and maybe is, even sealing someone or something inside of it. The way I approach this theory, I can give you and this is very common, though the structure might vary, is that originally I realized that in Japanese, Mugiwara Boshi, so that's the word for straw hat, has the word wara in it, which means laughter. And I do know that Oda loves playing around with words, so I actually dove a little bit into the Japanese of the entire phrase and was seeing if there was anything hidden in it. Also, by the way, later, before someone says it, I then actually found out that someone a couple of years ago separately had made that connection with Wara, but I kind of stumbled into it by myself, just looking at the Japanese stuff. So it's kind of cool seeing how different people find the same thing. But yeah, that was my starting point. I then looked into some of the Japanese, and I was also very curious about was there anything special about straw hats? And then I actually went, because I live in Japan, I went to a shrine and I remembered that they have these giant straw ropes everywhere around Shinto places, which is the, traditional multi-deity religion here next to Buddhism in Japan. So I looked a little bit more into the straw ropes, the namawabari, which basically are used to show the area in which a god lives, but also sometimes is used for sealing away gods or sealing away yokai and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, interesting. Could the straw hat here be something like that? And then my mind jumped, across to the scene with Joy Boy, where we know that Joy Boy wove his haki into a physical knot that got stored within Emmet, and I was like, wait, well, the straw hat was woven. Could that be, and then we know that Joy Boy had a straw hat, and then Roger had the straw, stuff. This is kind of how my thought process often goes. It starts with a fun idea, and then just kind of goes everywhere. And sometimes, obviously, we look more specifically into mythology, especially with Elbaph. It just makes a lot of sense to look when it comes to, for example, Loki, looking into Loki mythology. And as you say, yes, we do know for certain characters like Luffy, Brazilian. Oh, yes, they're for sure that makes it an impetus to look into Brazilian folklore. But I also just, in my free time, love reading mythology. I always have, even as a kid, and now even more so because it's fun, because not only do I enjoy all these like legends, I've been reading a lot of books recently on Japanese mythology also, because I love it personally, but funnily enough, it always seems very relevant for One Piece, because we do know that Oda, pulled so much from Japanese mythology, Norse mythology, Greek mythology, the Bible, right? Like Bible piece. And so I think my answer would be, it really depends on the video. Sometimes I actively go out and just look at myths, and very often you can just find something that applies to One Piece, either directly or indirectly. And sometimes it's more like you have an initial idea that seems fun, either because it seems like it's very likely, or sometimes it's just a very fun idea I like and want to make a video about, and you dig a little bit deeper and there's suddenly all these other connections. Whether that makes the theory true is like a different story, right? But, that's like the two approaches I think that are most common. With that being said, thank you so much. I'm very curious if you enjoy this format. I really wanted to try this out. Just you asking me questions. If you like it, please let me know by leaving a like. If you have a comment. And I would love to do this again. So if this video does really well, then I would want to do this like maybe once every couple of weeks. It's super fun getting to hear all your ideas. And yeah. Thank you otherwise to everyone on Patreon, also everyone of you on Patreon who submitted ideas, also everyone on YouTube who submitted questions, and I will see you in the next video. Yeah, hope you enjoyed this one. It was a lot of fun.